Hey, Dave LaCalli with HeadGames Motorworks. Today we are going to port a V casting. A V casting is for the EJ25. We're going to carve it up and I'm going to show you all how I do it. Alright, so there is like a bazillion, it feels like, castings for the EJ25. There's the B, the D, the W, the V, the B. Did I already say the B? I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff. And then you can put their S20. You can do the chamber on those, and you can make that into an EJ25 by doing the combustion chamber. That is also something that we're going to show. So there is a plethora of cylinder heads, but one thing that they all have in common is a dogleg port, and they have, so that's when the one port is like really far over on the exhaust side, and they all pretty much have like the same cam specs, all the parts interchange, and this is from, I know somebody's gonna like correct me on this because I should probably know this, but I think it's from like 98 up until till the FA came out, so somewhere in the 2000s. They're all kind of the same, but they're all also very different. So each one of them is just different in a little way that makes it very annoying if you're going to digitize them, because that means that you have to digitize all of them. And so we're going to do the V. Now, we've done a couple different cylinder heads thus far. We did the B and we did the D casting. We did that before we had a machine. Now we have our own machine, so all this stuff is going to kind of be redone, or it's going to be done on our machine to start. So this is one of them. So what I'm going to show you today is how to port one of these cylinder heads. I'm not going to give you measurements, but I am going to show you how I go about doing it. First thing you'll notice is the guides are still in the cylinder head, and I see a lot of guys trying to port these things with the guides in it. It really does you do yourself a disservice. The guides are very easy to remove from this head. You actually don't even need to heat the head up, and the problem is that it gets in the way. So if you're trying to grind inside here and you have a guide boss in the way, that is going to be a bad time. And you're not going to be able to get to the whole thing that you really want to. You can't shape it the way you want to, all because you can't use a air hammer and a tool to take them out. So this is for the guys who want to reuse the OEM guides when they're doing porting. If you're making enough jam to fully port a cylinder head for a Subaru, which is, I'm going to say 800 plus wheel horsepower, you don't want to port this thing at 600, 700, 800 horsepower. That's where I'm thinking that you need to get in, you need to dig into it. If you do a OEM guide, the OEM guide to valve clearance is pretty large. The problem is that any aftermarket valve, the stem diameter that goes into that guide is smaller. There is nothing, there is no valve available that is the same size as OEM. And most people are not going to measure this. So now you're going to put a valve in it that you're going to basically get even more valve to guide clearance. And what this means is it's going to beat up the valve job, it's going to beat up the valve, and for what? Because we didn't want to put guides in it and size them. And actually, this head is really easy to remove the valve guides because you don't even have to heat the head up. You can just knock the guide out, you get an air hammer, and you can get a cheap one from Harbor Freight. I suggest that you get one that doesn't have as much blows per minute because you don't want to crack the head. And you get a guide driver from Goodson for 40 bucks, 50 bucks. And now you can knock the guide out. You can port the head the way you want to. You can shape it, or you can send it to HeadGames and we can do it. But either way, you can put a bronze guide in it and size it correctly to the valve that you're going to use. This is the tough one right here. So you can see this is the dog leg. You can barely see all the way down there. It is a really hard This is probably one of the most difficult cylinder heads to port. Of all the heads we do, this is the easiest and the hardest, and it's hardest because of that turn right there. That turn is horrendous, and it's hard to get a tool in it. So what I'm going to show you how to get in there though. But this is, and it's round. So when it's round, trying to keep that shape can sometimes be hard, but I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Here's the intake port. Intake port's pretty straightforward. There's actually a lot of meat here, a whole lot of meat to remove. And yeah, so there's a lot of shaping actually. So what we're not going to do is we're not going to make this any bigger. That goes for the exhaust too. So the entrance of the port is going to stay the same. And then we do everything inside of the port. But first, we have to knock the guides out. So what you're going to see is me use the Super Spiral burr from HeadGames. Now this is the Honey Badger burr. You're going to see me rough in with this guy. And then you're going to see a lot of me using the 1/2 inch Super Spiral burr. Now I have two lengths. Why do I have two lengths? So this one is going to be for doing a lot of the long work in the exhaust port. And this one right here, we're primarily going to use this guy on the intake to make a fin. I'll show you that later, but the reason why is because of how hard I have to push. Again, I'll show you that later. This is my go-to grinder, and I use a speed controller. You can see here, got that from Goodson. You can also see these on Amazon. So first up, you're going to see me use the Honey Badger of burrs, and that is the HeadGames 3/4 Super Spiral burr. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to rough out the bowls. I'm going to do the bowls first, and then I'm going to go into the floor of the runner, and just keep watching. One thing to note here is I see a lot of guys showing some videos of them porting, and they go up here. Now this is something I mentioned in a couple videos, that you do not want to port anything without you looking at it. So what I'm doing here is this is one hand, camera in the other, and I am showing you that the grinder itself only moves in this direction. So this is all you really want to do. You don't want to push down here, because if you start pushing, you're going to change the shape, and you don't really want to oblong anything here. You want to make it round. It's not round to begin with, but you want to make it round. And I'm using the biggest burr I can stick in here in order to do so. So it's less shaping. It's more of just cutting it and making it the right shape that I want to make it. And I'm only going to do from here to here. I do here to here, and then I do the center. I don't go up here because that is next. I'm just going to move the head. So this is what you're going to do. You're just going to move it here in the center, and go on. No doubt the hardest thing for me to video is the short turn, but the short turns are the most important part of any cylinder head. And so I just talked about the bowl, and know that the short turn is basically an extension of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to reshape it, because it's not really the shape I want it to, but I'm not going to lay it back too much. I'm just going to grind all this. I'm going to widen it, and then I'm going to shape the center and bring it all back into the bottom cut of the valve seat. This is the OEM valve job. We'll eventually size all this and blend it all in, but this is how you rough it in. All right, so now we're at the intake port, the port itself. And this is the meat and potatoes, basically. Now, we're not putting a gasket on it. I'm actually not showing you how I measured it at all. And during the roughing process, I don't measure it. I just look for the shapes that I'm looking for. And one of the shapes I'm looking for here is this right here is a fin that we are gonna make more pronounced. And we're gonna keep the fin. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna take all this material here. And I know some guys are screaming, don't touch the floor. Well, you're not dealing with a V8 here. You're not dealing with a ski slope of a port. This port actually picks up from doing the floor. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to blend all of this in. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to make this as a fin. And what's cool about doing the Subaru from the floor first, so I never poured it from this side and go this way. I poured it from the floor first because there's so much meat to take out here, and I have to blend it into the walls. And when I blend it into the walls, it's much easier to do from this side than this side because there's not enough room. But you could do almost the entire port just from this side. Alright, so here she is all roughed out on the floor. So now, time to do the roof. So the HeadGames Super Spiral 1/2" burr is our go-to here. It's going to fit in there. I'm basically going to make it fit. But the problem is with the shaft, when you have a 6-inch long shaft, trying to push really hard on this is going to make it flex. So what I do is I cut it down. And I cut it down, you can see here it's about 3 inches long. And this way I could really put some pressure on it and I'm not going to bend it. And that's going to be good for the grinder and for the burr. So now we're at the roof of the port. Now the roof of the port, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the HeadGames 1/2" Super Spiral burr and I'm going to just make a trench right here. So I'm going to make a trench on each side. Actually it starts all the way back here. And you can see how I was talking about blending all this in. So now once you make a trench here, there's going to be a lot of blending here. So we're basically going to raise the roof and then we're going to blend it into the walls and just keep on watching. You guys can see the smoke coming off of this burr. So a lot of times I just keep going and I don't use really any fluid on these Super Spiral burrs because they don't really load up. And you can see I was really winging on it, and it has just very little metal that welded itself basically, or melted itself into the burr. And so we just use some bow lube and it'll just take it right out. Alright guys, what I didn't show is me going over the whole port with this 1/2" Super Spiral burr. This is the 1/2". So what I did is I do it at a slower speed. I do it at a slower speed because it is going to blend all this in. It makes it a nice surface finish. And Now you're looking at it grinded and you're like, oh Dave, you know, it probably look better sanded. Yes, it would. And it's going to get sanded. And we do that for two things. It's for, you want to make a clean data. So when the probe comes in here on the CNC, you want it to not hit all these like little ridges here. But also for looks, I mean, the 60 grit is just going to look so much better. And I do the same thing. So I'm going to hit it with a 60 grit and I take all of these marks out and then I go back over it and I make it look good. And that's exactly what I did here. So I roughed it all in. And then when I go back over it in the slower speed, I make it the size. And I try to measure everything out and I just kind of fine tune it and make them all the same. And I don't go crazy on trying to do that as I'm roughing it in because I don't have time for that. I'm just looking for the shape. So now that this is all done, what we're going to do is start on the exhaust. On the exhaust, I just want to show something real quick. Now we knocked the guides out, and we knocked the guides out because I mentioned how they would get in the way of us porting. But also know that the guide boss is also in the way of us doing the bowl if we're going to do a full port. So when you do a pocket port, I'm not going down that deep, but during a full port, this is totally going to get in the way. This here is totally going to get in the way of me grinding this thing successfully. And what I do is, you saw how I did the intake side and I started at the bowl. On this one, we're going to start it in the port. So we're going to start at the roof of the port. So to rough it in, I'm going to do the honey badger. I'm going to do the honey badger and it's 6 inches long. You can see that the burr is long enough to get all the way back here. The problem is that the shape, or you see how it's hitting right here? It won't let you get back there. The first thing we have to do on this port is we're going to make a fin here. So you can see that there is nothing here. It's all flat. I'm going to make a fin and then I'm going to bring this wall over and then I'm going to take the guide bosses out. Once I take the guide bosses out, then I can work on the walls and I can finish it all up. All right, guys, the finished product. Now, you see those fins in there? You know those fins weren't there to begin with. And you saw me starting to make them. I made them by using the Super Spiral Burr, the Honey Badger, the 3/4, and I made 2 trenches. And then I blended all this in, and I didn't show the rest of it on camera. Again, it's just a lot. It's a lot to put on camera because this, I don't have a lot of space to deal with it. And the same thing here. So I put the Super Spiral Burr in here and I basically made a trench. And if you look, the biggest thing that I want to, for you to take away about using this burr is that the port is round and this is round. Which I mean is the burr is round, the port is round, and by using a round burr and the biggest burr, it's much easier to make this shape than it would be if you were to use a smaller burr and just keep trying to make the shape. Don't touch the outside of the flange. I only go inside, I reshape everything inside. I totally reshape and resize everything outside of it so the cross-sectional area of the outside of the port stays the same. And then I bring the burr in here and I move this wall over to make room for the burr to go all the way down. You can see, do the same thing on the floor of the port. The floor of the port has the fin too. And you'll also notice that there's this little section here that I don't touch. And that is because that's the end of the fin. In order to make the fin, I can't really grind in that area. If I did it, I would take away the shape of the rest of it. So I don't want to do that. Everything doesn't need to be touched in order to be right. but you can see here, goes all the way down. Sorry guys, it's hard to focus on it. And this is part of the reason why I didn't want to try to show it on camera. It's just, it's a really hard thing. On this head, it's next to impossible, like you can't see it. Can you imagine what it's going to be like to machine this thing, or what it's like to port it? Everything you do with this head is not a novice thing to do. It is very, very hard. Again, we got the intake ports all ready to sand. And I think another thing we should talk about is the area underneath the valve seats, and how you see how it's not touched there. It's not touching any of them. So one thing I don't like is I see a lot of guys who would think that just because that area underneath the valve seat is not touched, that they need to touch it. They need to make it everything as big as it can be, so that way it cleans all the way up. Here is the issue with that. When you go to do something like that, you're actually making it too big. And if you make it too big, you're actually going to hurt airflow. Too big or too small, you know it, and too big, everybody knows it, because it just won't get out of its own way. That's right, things can be too big, and you'd go the other way. So what it's called is like a point of diminishing returns. So you wanted to make it bigger, you wanted to clean it all up, you wanted to keep the casting, you don't like the bottom of the seat is has like a little ridge to it. But the problem is that it would hurt it more than it would help it if you take it away. Never, ever, ever do that. All right, guys, this thing is done. Well, it's not completely done. We got to sand it. So we're going to sand it. I'm not going to take a video of that, but we're going to sand it, get all the grinding marks out of it, and then it's going to go into the CNC, and Matt is going to digitize it. We're going to show all of that. There's going to be quite a few hurdles, I'm sure. That exhaust port is not easy to grind. It's not easy to see, and I can only imagine it's not going to be easy to digitize. I think it's probably one of the hardest heads to put on the CNC of all the heads we do. So if you guys want to see all that, I think that you should hit the subscribe button, make sure you get notifications, and we will see each other soon. Toodles.
HeadGames!